A billionaire stands in his mansion, looking at his cleaning lady scrubbing the floors, and decides to do something so cruel, so calculated, that it would become the biggest mistake of his entire life. Richard Thornwell pulled out a gold-embossed invitation, the kind that costs more than most people make in a week, and handed it to the woman on her hands and knees cleaning his marble floors. His voice dripped with fake kindness as he said the words that would destroy him. "Grace, you've been such a dedicated employee. I'd like to invite you to our charity gala next month. Black tie event. I'm sure you'll figure something out." His billionaire friend Derek burst out laughing. They walked away, already celebrating their cruel joke. They were going to invite the cleaning lady to the most exclusive event of the year and watch her humiliate herself in front of 300 of the city's elite. It was going to be their entertainment for the evening. But what Richard didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the woman holding that invitation wasn't just a cleaning lady. She had a past, she had secrets, and she had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. 3 weeks later, those mansion doors would swing open at his gala, and Richard Thornwell's face would drain of all color as he whispered 5 words that would become legendary. That's the cleaning lady." But she wouldn't look like a cleaning lady. She would look like royalty. And she was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 weeks before that unforgettable entrance. To the moment when Richard Thornwell made the worst decision of his life. It was a Tuesday afternoon at the Thornwell estate, a 40,000 square foot monument to excess, with Italian marble floors, French antiques, and more rooms than most people could count. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a declaration that Richard Thornwell had made it, that he'd clawed his way from nothing to everything, and he wanted the world to know it. And there, on her hands and knees in the West Wing study, was Grace Monroe. At 52 years old, Grace had been cleaning the Thornwell estate for 6 years. 6 long years of scrubbing floors, polishing silver, dusting priceless antiques. She wore her navy cleaning uniform like it was tailored just for her, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. Her movements were precise, almost elegant. There was a rhythm to how she worked, a kind of meditation in the repetitive motions. Grace didn't just clean, she restored. She transformed. Every surface she touched went from dull to gleaming, from chaotic to pristine. She took pride in her work, found dignity in it. Because Grace Monroe understood something that the people living in this mansion never would. Honest work had its own honor, its own beauty. But here's the thing about being a cleaning lady in a billionaire's mansion. You become invisible. A piece of furniture. Background noise. The wealthy move around you like you're not even there, conducting their private conversations, revealing their true selves, never once considering that you might be listening, might be watching, might be remembering every single thing. And Grace? Grace saw everything. While she polished the mahogany desks, she heard the shady business deals whispered behind closed doors. While she cleaned the crystal decanters, she observed the family's dysfunction, the cracks in their perfect facade. While she mopped the endless marble floors, she witnessed exactly who these people were when they thought no one important was watching. She'd been invisible for 6 years. And being invisible had given her the greatest power of all, the power to truly see. This job had been Grace's lifeline. As a single mother, she'd raised 3 children on this salary. Every floor she scrubbed put food on the table. Every window she polished bought school supplies. Every surface she cleaned was an investment in her children's future. Her kids were grown now, successful, independent, thriving, and Grace had done that. She'd sacrificed her pride, worked until her hands ached, and she'd done it all without complaint. Because Grace knew her worth wasn't determined by what other people thought of her. The Thornwell family, however, thought very highly of themselves. Richard Thornwell was a 45-year-old tech billionaire who wore his self-made status like a crown. He'd built his empire from a garage startup, turned lines of code into billions of dollars, and he never let anyone forget it. He was the kind of man who needed to be the smartest person in every room, the most powerful, the most feared. Every interaction was a power play. Every conversation was a chance to prove his dominance. To Richard, people were chess pieces, and he loved moving them around his board. His wife, Olivia, was 38 and clinging desperately to the beauty that had bought her this life. A former model who'd traded her youth for a massive diamond ring and a mansion, she lived in constant terror of being replaced by a younger version. She obsessed over social status, who she was photographed with, what designer she wore, which exclusive events she attended. Every friendship was strategic. Every smile was calculated. The staff barely registered as human to her, except when something wasn't perfect. Their son Brandon was 19 and already a college dropout. He was entitled in that special way that only extreme wealth creates, bored by everything, impressed by nothing, floating through life on his father's money. He treated the estate like a luxury hotel and the staff like servants who existed solely for his convenience. But there was one member of the family who was different. Celeste Thornwell, Richard's 72-year-old mother, came from old money, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. She'd been born into wealth, married into more of it, and watched her son transform money into something cruel and vulgar. She rarely spoke at family dinners anymore, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. And lately, those eyes had been following Grace with an expression that looked almost like curiosity, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Grace was in the study that afternoon, carefully dusting the leather-bound books that lined the walls. Books that no one ever read, but were there to make Richard look cultured. Sunlight poured through the massive windows, and Grace was lost in the peaceful rhythm of her work when voices drifted in from the adjoining parlor. She recognized Richard's voice immediately. That particular blend of arrogance and amusement. And then another voice, Derek Chen, a fellow billionaire, one of Richard's closest friends and equally insufferable. Grace didn't mean to eavesdrop. But when you're invisible, people forget you have ears. Your events are becoming predictable, Richard, Derek was saying, boredom evident in his tone. Same people, same boring speeches about charity, same expensive champagne. Where's the excitement? Where's the edge? Last year's gala had me falling asleep by 9. Grace heard footsteps, the clink of ice in crystal glasses. Richard was probably pouring them both scotch from his $20,000 bottle. Predictable? Richard's voice carried that dangerous edge he got when someone challenged him. Derek, my events are legendary. We're legendary, Derek corrected. Now they're just expected. You need something fresh, something that'll have people talking for months. There was a long pause. Grace could practically hear Richard's mind working, calculating. Then footsteps approached the study, and she felt that shift in the air that came when Richard Thornwell entered a room. That oppressive energy of someone who demanded attention, who fed on control. You want excitement? Richard's voice was suddenly closer, and Grace could hear the cruel smile in it. Watch this. Grace kept dusting, kept her head down, playing her part perfectly. But every nerve in her body was alert now, sensing danger the way animals sense an approaching storm. Richard appeared in the doorway, Derek right behind him, both of them wearing expressions that made Grace's stomach drop. She'd seen that look before, the look of men about to do something cruel for their own amusement. Richard's face transformed. His features arranged themselves into something resembling kindness, but Grace had been around long enough to recognize a mask when she saw one. He walked toward her with exaggerated warmth, like he was approaching a beloved family pet. Grace, his voice was so sweet it was almost sickening. Just the person I wanted to see. Grace straightened slowly, still holding her dusting cloth. She kept her face neutral, her voice respectful. Yes, Mr. Thornwell? I was just having a conversation with Derek here about our annual charity gala, you know the one. Biggest social event of the season. 300 guests, politicians, celebrities, the absolute cream of society. He paused, and Grace saw it coming, saw the trap being set. And I realized something terrible. Sir? You've worked for us for 6 years. 6 loyal, dedicated years. And we've never properly thanked you, never properly shown you how much we appreciate your service. Every word dripped with condescension. Grace's hands tightened slightly on the dusting cloth, but her face remained calm. The job is thanks enough, Mr. Thornwell. Nonsense. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored, thick, expensive, with gold embossing that caught the light. The kind of invitation that people framed, that represented entry into a world most people would never touch. I want you to come to our gala, Grace, as our honored guest. Time seemed to slow. Grace stared at the envelope, her mind racing through possibilities, trying to find the angle, the catch. Because there was always a catch with men like Richard Thornwell. She took the envelope with steady hands, even though warning bells were screaming in her head. Inside was an invitation to the Thornwell Charity Gala, her name written in elegant calligraphy that probably cost $50 a letter. Miss Grace Monroe. She looked up at Richard, and that's when she saw it, that barely concealed smirk, that flash of malicious glee in his eyes. It's black tie, of course, Richard continued, and now the mockery was creeping into his voice like poison. Very formal. Very exclusive. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe there's a nice thrift store nearby? Behind him, Derek exploded into laughter, loud, sharp, cruel. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. Grace's mind crystallized in that moment. She understood completely. This wasn't generosity. This wasn't appreciation. This was entertainment. Richard Thornwell was inviting the cleaning lady to a black tie gala filled with billionaires and celebrities so he could watch her struggle, watch her fail, watch her humiliate herself while everyone laughed. She was the joke, the punchline, the evening's entertainment. Well? Richard's eyebrows raised expectantly. What do you say, Grace? Will you honor us with your presence? Grace looked down at the invitation in her hands. 6 years of being invisible. 6 years of swallowing her pride, of accepting her place in their world, of cleaning up their messes while they treated her like she was nothing. 6 years of being underestimated, dismissed, forgotten. Something shifted inside her. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time suddenly woke up. She lifted her eyes to meet Richard's, and when she spoke, her voice was perfectly controlled, perfectly calm. Thank you, Mr. Thornwell. This is very unexpected. Oh, we like to be unexpected, Richard said, already turning away, already celebrating his cruel victory. We'll see you there, Grace. Can't wait. He and Derek walked away, their laughter echoing down the marble hallways. Grace heard Derek say, "Oh man, this is going to be priceless. Can you imagine? Her showing up in some discount store dress?" And Richard's response, "I've already told the photographer to keep his camera ready. This is going to be legendary." Grace stood alone in that sunlit study, the invitation trembling ever so slightly in her hands. For 6 years she'd been invisible. For 6 years she'd played small, stayed in her lane, done what was necessary to survive. For 6 years she'd let them believe she was nothing more than what they saw. But Richard Thornwell had just made a catastrophic mistake. He'd given her an invitation. He'd opened a door. He'd challenged her without realizing that the woman he was challenging had weapons he couldn't even imagine. Grace looked down at the invitation, at her name written in gold, and her jaw tightened. Her eyes, those eyes that had watched everything, remembered everything, flashed with something dangerous, something powerful, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. They thought this was a joke. They thought she would either not show up or arrive as some kind of spectacle for them to mock. They had no idea who Grace Monroe really was. They had no idea what she'd given up, what she'd survived, what she was capable of. But they were about to find out. Because Grace Monroe had a secret, a past that she'd buried 6 years ago, a life that she'd walked away from. And in 3 weeks, at that gala, she was going to show Richard Thornwell and his entire world what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, humility for helplessness. The cleaning lady was about to become their worst nightmare. Before we continue with Grace's incredible transformation, if you're already hooked on this story and can't wait to see how she absolutely destroys Richard's expectations, smash that subscribe button right now. And tell in the comments section from which country are you watching this story right now, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. And here's my question for you. Have you ever been underestimated or mocked by someone who thought they were better than you? How did you prove them wrong? Share your stories in the comments. I want to hear how you turn the tables. Because what Grace is about to do to Richard Thornwell It's going to redefine what it means to get the last laugh. That evening, Grace sat in her modest apartment, the gold-embossed invitation lying on her small kitchen table like a grenade waiting to explode. The apartment was a far cry from the Thornwell estate. Just 3 rooms in a working-class neighborhood, furnished simply but kept immaculately clean. Everything had its place. Everything had purpose. This was the life Grace had built from nothing, and she built it with pride. But tonight, that invitation stared back at her, representing everything she'd left behind, everything she'd run from, everything she'd thought she'd never have to face again. She picked it up, running her fingers over the expensive paper, the embossed gold lettering. Miss Grace Monroe. They didn't even know her full name. They didn't know anything about her. And that had been exactly the point. The door opened, and Grace's daughter Jasmine walked in, still wearing her sharp lawyer's suit from the office. At 28, Jasmine had her mother's intelligence and her father's ambition, but without his cruelty. She carried her briefcase in one hand and takeout in the other, her usual Thursday night routine with her mom. "Hey mama, I brought Chinese from that place you like." Jasmine stopped mid-sentence, her eyes landing on the invitation on the table. She set down the food slowly, picked up the cream-colored card and read it. Her face transformed from confusion to understanding to pure fury in about 3 seconds. "No." Jasmine's voice was sharp, protective. "Absolutely not. Mom, please tell me you're not considering this." Grace looked at her daughter, quiet, contemplative. "It's just an invitation, Jazz." "It's not just an invitation." Jasmine threw the card back on the table like it had burned her. "This is humiliation, Mom. This is that entitled billionaire setting you up to be his entertainment. Can't you see that? He wants you to show up so he and his rich friends can laugh at you, so they can take pictures and feel superior. This is sick." Grace stood, moving to the window, looking out at the city lights. "You're right. That's exactly what he wants." "Then you're not going." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, a plea. Grace turned back to her daughter, and something in her eyes made Jasmine pause. There was a fire there, a determination that Jasmine hadn't seen in years. "Or, I could show them who I really am." Jasmine stared at her mother. "What are you talking about?" Grace walked to her bedroom, and Jasmine followed. Grace opened her closet, reached to the very back, and pulled out a box she hadn't touched in 6 years. Inside were photographs, documents, remnants of a life she'd buried. She handed a photograph to Jasmine, a picture of a woman in a stunning evening gown at a charity gala, dripping in diamonds, standing next to a handsome but cold-eyed man. The woman was younger, but unmistakably Grace. "Mom, is this you?" Jasmine whispered. "That's Grace Monroe St. Clair." Grace said softly. "That's who I was. Before I became just Grace Monroe, before I became invisible." And then Grace told her daughter the full story. The story she'd only shared in pieces over the years. 20 years ago, Grace had been married to Lawrence St. Clair, a real estate magnate worth hundreds of millions. She'd lived in a world of private jets and exclusive galas, of designer everything and unlimited wealth. Her children attended the most prestigious boarding schools. She wore couture like it was casual Friday. She moved through elite society like she'd been born to it, because she had been. Grace came from old money herself, had married into more money, and had lived a life that looked perfect from the outside. But behind closed doors, Lawrence was a monster. Controlling, manipulative, and when his control was challenged, violent. He used his wealth like a weapon, used his power to isolate Grace, to make her dependent, to break her spirit. For years, Grace had played the perfect wife, terrified of what he might do if she left, terrified of losing her children in a custody battle she couldn't win. Lawrence had the best lawyers, the most powerful connections, judges in his pocket. But then one night, Lawrence turned his rage on their oldest son. That was the line Grace wouldn't let him cross. She'd made a choice. She could fight for the money, fight for the houses and the cars and the lifestyle, and watch Lawrence drag their children through a brutal custody battle that would destroy them. Or she could walk away from everything, the wealth, the status, the life, if he agreed to let the children go. Lawrence had laughed at first, then he'd seen she was serious. In the end, he'd agreed. He kept everything. The houses, the money, the social connections. Grace got the only thing that mattered: her children and their freedom. She'd changed her name back to Monroe, her maiden name. She'd taken her kids and disappeared into a normal life. She'd worked as a cleaning lady because it was honest work that paid the bills, because it kept her invisible from the world she'd left behind, because it meant Lawrence could never find them again. She'd raised 3 successful children on that cleaning salary. She'd given them love and stability and safety, and she'd done it all while scrubbing the floors of people who thought she was nobody. "I chose this life, Jazz," Grace said, looking at her daughter. "I chose poverty and freedom over wealth and control, and I'd make that choice again in a heartbeat. But I've been invisible for 6 years. Maybe it's time they see me, really see me." Jasmine's eyes were wet with tears. "Mom, you don't have to prove anything to those people." "No," Grace agreed. "But maybe I need to prove something to myself, that I can walk back into that world and walk back out on my own terms, that Richard Thornwell doesn't get to decide who I am or what I'm worth." The next morning, Grace did something she hadn't done in 6 years. She called her sister. Lorraine Monroe owned one of the most exclusive boutiques in the city, the kind of place where appointments were required and price tags were considered vulgar. She and Grace had been close once, before Grace's marriage, before the fall, before everything changed. But when Grace had walked away from wealth, Lorraine had seen it as a betrayal of everything their family stood for. They hadn't spoken in years. Grace stood outside the boutique, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the door. The window displays showed gowns that cost more than Grace made in 6 months. She almost turned around, almost walked away. But then she remembered Richard's smirk, Derek's cruel laughter, the way they'd looked at her like she was nothing. She walked in. The boutique was elegant, all cream and gold, with soft lighting that made everything glow. A young assistant approached, took one look at Grace's simple clothes, and her smile became strained. "I'm sorry, we're by appointment only." "She's with me." Lorraine's voice cut through the space like a knife. Grace looked up to see her sister descending the curved staircase. Lorraine was 55 now, her hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer suit that probably cost $5,000. She looked like old money and new success, and her face was carefully neutral as she studied Grace. "Lorraine," Grace said quietly. "Grace." Lorraine stopped a few feet away, arms crossed. "It's been 6 years, no calls, no visits, and now you're here. Let me guess, you need something." The words stung, but Grace couldn't argue. "I need to borrow a dress, just for one night." Lorraine's laugh was bitter. "A dress? Of course. You walked away from everything, from our family's legacy, from the life we were born into, from me, and now you need a dress." "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "Important enough to finally contact your sister after 6 years of silence?" Lorraine's voice cracked slightly. "You disappeared, Grace. You became a ghost. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Watching you throw everything away, watching you choose poverty over pride." Grace met her sister's eyes. "I chose freedom over fear, Lorraine. I chose my children's safety over social status, and I'd do it again." The sisters stared at each other, years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them. Then Lorraine's expression shifted, something softening in her eyes. "Why do you need a dress?" Grace pulled out the invitation and handed it to her sister. Lorraine read it and her eyebrows shot up. "The Thornwell Gala? Grace, this is— Wait." Understanding dawned on her face. "You're working for the Thornwells? As what?" "Their housekeeper." Lorraine's mouth fell open. Then, unexpectedly, she started to laugh. Not cruel laughter, but genuine, almost delighted laughter. "Oh, this is rich. Richard Thornwell, that pompous tech billionaire, has no idea who cleans his toilets. Does he? He has no idea he's had Grace Monroe St. Clair scrubbing his floors? He invited me as a joke," Grace admitted. "He wants to watch the cleaning lady humiliate herself at a black tie event." Lorraine's laughter died. Her eyes went sharp, calculating. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face, a smile that reminded Grace of the mischievous girls they'd once been. "You don't need to borrow anything, Grace." Lorraine walked to her sister, taking her hands. "Let me remind you who you were. Let me remind you who you are." What happened next was a transformation. Lorraine closed the boutique early, sent her staff home, and turned her full attention to her sister. She pulled out gowns Grace couldn't afford in a lifetime, midnight blue silk that pooled like water, emerald green that brought out the warmth in Grace's skin, deep burgundy that made her look like royalty. Grace stood in front of the three-way mirror as Lorraine adjusted a dress, and for the first time in 6 years, she saw herself. Not the invisible cleaning lady, not the woman in the simple uniform, but Grace Monroe St. Clair, the woman she'd been, the woman she still was underneath everything. "You've been hiding," Lorraine said softly, pinning the fabric. "I understand why. But Grace, you're still in there. I can see her." They chose the midnight blue gown, a custom piece that fit Grace like it had been painted on her body. Lorraine opened her personal jewelry vault, pulling out pieces that had belonged to their grandmother, an emerald ring, a diamond necklace, earrings that caught the light like stars. Grace watched herself in the mirror as Lorraine worked, as each piece was added, as the transformation completed. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted, her eyes brightened with something that had been dormant for too long: confidence, power. Grace. "There she is," Lorraine whispered, standing behind her sister, hands on her shoulders. "There's the woman I remember, the woman who once owned every room she walked into." Grace stared at her reflection, barely recognizing herself, and yet seeing exactly who she was. "I'd forgotten what this felt like." "Then it's time to remember." Meanwhile, back at the Thornwell estate, preparations for the gala were in full swing. Event planners rushed through rooms, florists arranged elaborate displays, and caterers set up for 300 guests. The house buzzed with controlled chaos, everything orchestrated to perfection for Richard's big night. Olivia stood in the master bedroom, trying on her 5th dress of the evening, anxiety written all over her face. "Richard, did you really invite the help to this event?" Richard was adjusting his bow tie, barely paying attention to his wife's concern. "Her name is Grace, and yes, I invited her." "Relax, Olivia." "Relax? What if she actually shows up? What if she comes here in some ridiculous outfit and makes a scene?" Richard laughed, the sound cold and amused. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Can you imagine? The cleaning lady showing up in some thrift store dress, trying to fit in with senators and celebrities? Derek and I will dine out on this story for years." "That's cruel, Richard." "It's entertainment." He turned to look at his wife. "These events are boring, Olivia. Same people, same conversations, same everything. Our guests need something to talk about. Grace will give them that." Brandon appeared in the doorway, already in his tux, looking uncomfortable. "Dad, this whole thing is kind of messed up. That lady's been nothing but nice to us for 6 years. Richard's expression hardened. "It's called a social experiment, son. These people think they're so evolved, so progressive. Let's see how they really react when someone from the help crashes their party. It'll be enlightening. It'll be humiliating," Brandon muttered. "Sure. Then maybe she'll learn to stay in her lane." Richard's voice had an edge now. "The world has a natural order, Brandon. She cleans floors. We write checks. That's how it works." In the hallway, Celeste Thornwell stood just out of sight, having heard every word. The elderly woman's face was tight with disappointment. She'd raised her son better than this, or at least, she'd tried to. Somewhere along the way, Richard's success had turned into arrogance, his confidence into cruelty. She thought about Grace, the quiet, dignified woman who'd cleaned their home for 6 years. There was something about her, something Celeste had noticed. The way she carried herself. The way she looked at the art on the walls with knowledge, not just as something to dust. The way she moved through the house with a grace that seemed almost practiced. Celeste had been rich her entire life. She knew her own kind when she saw them. And Grace, she was beginning to suspect, was hiding something. Downstairs, Richard was briefing his assistant, Kevin. The young man stood nervously, tablet in hand, trying to keep up with his boss's rapid-fire instructions. "Kevin, the guest list is confirmed. 300 people, senators, CEOs, celebrities, everyone who's anyone will be here." Richard's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "But our special guest is the cleaning lady, Grace Monroe." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, about that? I want security briefed. When she arrives, if she arrives, I want cameras ready. Professional photographers positioned at the entrance. I want to capture the moment she realizes she's in over her head. Mr. Thornwell, is that really? Are you questioning me, Kevin? Kevin swallowed hard. No, sir. I'll make sure everything is arranged. Richard clapped him on the shoulder. Good man. This is going to be legendary. The look on people's faces when they see the help at a black tie gala? Priceless. Kevin nodded and walked away, but his hands were shaking. He'd worked for Richard for 3 years, and every day his boss found new ways to demonstrate that kindness and wealth rarely coexisted. He'd watched Richard humiliate employees, crush competitors, and treat people like they were disposable. But this felt different. This felt personal. This felt wrong. The guest list glowed on Kevin's tablet. Senators, tech moguls, Hollywood stars, international diplomats. 300 of the most powerful people in the country, all coming to witness Richard's charity and generosity. None of them knowing that the real entertainment Richard had planned was the public humiliation of a cleaning lady who'd done nothing but work hard and keep her head down. Kevin looked at Grace's name on the security list, flagged as special attention required, and something twisted in his gut. He'd met Grace dozens of times. She was kind, professional, invisible by design, and Richard was setting her up to be destroyed. For the first time in 3 years, Kevin wondered if he could keep working for a man like this. The stage was set, the trap was laid. 300 elite guests would arrive expecting an elegant evening of charity and social networking. Richard Thornwell expected an evening of entertainment at Grace's expense. But none of them knew what was really coming. None of them knew that the woman they'd dismissed, the woman they'd made invisible, was about to walk into that gala and shatter every assumption they'd ever made. Grace Monroe was coming. And she wasn't coming to play their game. She was coming to change the rules entirely. If you're loving this story and can't wait to see Grace absolutely stun everyone at that gala, hit that subscribe button right now. The transformation is about to get real, and you don't want to miss a single moment of Richard's face when he realizes his huge mistake. Now tell me, have you ever had someone in your life try to set you up for failure only for you to turn it around on them? What happened? Drop your stories in the comments. I live for these comebacks. Because what happens when Grace walks through those doors? It's about to become the most talked about moment of the year. The night of the gala arrived like a storm on the horizon, inevitable, electric, and about to change everything. The Thornwell estate had been transformed into something beyond a mansion. It was a palace now, a temple to wealth and power. Every surface gleamed under crystal chandeliers that cast golden light across marble floors. Tens of thousands of white roses created archways and cascading displays. Ice sculptures caught the light like diamonds. A string quartet played classical music that floated through rooms designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind everyone present that they were in the presence of greatness. Or at least, that's what Richard Thornwell wanted them to believe. Outside, luxury cars lined up like jewels on a string. Bentleys, Ferraris, Rolls-Royces, limousines with darkened windows, each one carrying someone powerful, someone important, someone worth knowing. A red carpet stretched from the circular driveway to the grand entrance, flanked by photographers whose cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every arrival, every designer gown, every famous face. The city's elite emerged from their vehicles like actors on a stage. Senator Patricia Aldridge, powerful and poised, in a champagne-colored gown that cost more than most people's cars. Tech mogul Jonathan Haidt, whose social media empire had made him a billionaire before 30. Award-winning architect James Wu, known for designing buildings that defied gravity and imagination. Hollywood stars, international diplomats, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, 300 of the most influential people in the country, all here for Richard Thornwell's annual display of charity and excess. Richard and Olivia stood at the entrance, the perfect power couple, greeting each guest with practiced charm. Richard in a custom tuxedo that probably cost $20,000. Olivia in a gown dripping with diamonds that caught every flash of the cameras. They smiled, they laughed, they soaked in the admiration like sunlight. This was Richard's kingdom, and everyone here knew it. Derek Chen arrived fashionably late, as billionaires often do. He stepped out of his car with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He approached Richard with a knowing smirk, leaning in close. "So where's your entertainment?" Derek's voice was low, conspiratorial. "Where's the cleaning lady? I've been looking forward to this all week." Richard's smile turned predatory. "Patience, my friend. The night is young. She probably won't even show. And if she does—" He glanced at his watch. "Well, the real show is yet to come." The evening continued. Guests mingled in the grand ballroom, champagne flowed like water, and conversations hummed with the particular energy of people who believed they were the most important in any room. Richard moved through the crowd like a king, accepting compliments, discussing business deals, reminding everyone of his genius, his success, his power. 8:47 p.m. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi. Conversations about stock markets and political campaigns filled the air. Waiters circulated with appetizers that cost $100 a plate. Everything was going according to plan. And then the crowd's chatter began to dim. It started at the entrance, like a wave moving backward through the ballroom. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The string quartet continued playing, but nobody was listening anymore, because everyone was staring at the doors. A vintage Rolls-Royce had pulled up. Not just any Rolls-Royce, but a classic from the 1960s, perfectly restored, gleaming black with chrome that caught every light. The kind of car that whispered old money, real wealth, the kind that didn't need to shout. The crowd pressed closer to the windows, to the entrance, trying to see who was arriving in such style. Even Richard turned, curious despite himself. This wasn't on the guest list. He knew every car, every arrival. This was unexpected. The driver, in perfect livery, stepped out and moved to the rear door. He opened it with a practiced flourish. First, a hand emerged. A hand with deep brown skin that seemed to glow in the evening light, and on one finger an emerald ring, vintage, exquisite, the kind of jewelry that had history, that had stories, that screamed legacy. Then she stepped out, and the world stopped breathing. Grace Monroe emerged from that Rolls-Royce like a queen returning from exile. The midnight blue gown Lorraine had chosen fit her like it had been sculpted onto her body. Custom, couture, the kind of dress that fashion magazines would talk about for months. The fabric caught the light and seemed to shimmer, flowing around her like water, like silk, like midnight itself. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style that showcased the graceful line of her neck, where diamonds, her grandmother's diamonds, sparkled like captured stars. The emerald ring on her hand matched earrings that swayed gently as she moved, catching light and throwing it back like a challenge. But it wasn't just the dress or the jewelry. It was the way she carried herself. Grace moved up that red carpet with a confidence that couldn't be bought, couldn't be faked, couldn't be learned from any finishing school. This was bone-deep, soul-deep confidence. The kind that came from knowing exactly who you were and not needing anyone's permission to be it. Her shoulders were back, her chin lifted, her eyes calm and knowing. She looked like royalty. She looked like power. She looked absolutely, devastatingly, undeniably magnificent. Complete silence fell over the entrance. 300 of the city's most powerful people stood frozen, staring at this woman who had appeared like a vision, like a dream, like something their world didn't quite have words for. The photographers' cameras exploded in a frenzy of flashing light. They'd been hired to capture celebrities and politicians, but they knew magic when they saw it. Every lens turned toward Grace, capturing her ascent up the red carpet, capturing the way the light loved her, capturing what would become the most talked-about arrival of the decade. Grace moved through the parted crowd and people stepped back instinctively, making way like she was visiting royalty. The whispers started, quiet at first, then building like a crescendo. "Who is she? I've never seen her before. Look at that dress, that's custom. That's not off any rack. Those diamonds are real. Those are serious stones. She's absolutely stunning. Is she a visiting dignitary? An actress?" Grace moved through them all with a slight smile, acknowledging the stares without seeming to need them, comfortable in the attention without appearing to seek it. She glided across the marble floors she'd scrubbed 100 times, past the artwork she'd dusted, through the halls she'd cleaned, but now she moved through them as someone entirely different. And then she reached Richard Thornwell. Richard stood frozen, his champagne glass suspended in his hand, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with something between shock and horror and absolute disbelief. His brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. It couldn't compute. It couldn't make sense of how this was possible. Grace stopped directly in front of him, extended her hand, the one with the emerald ring, with perfect grace and perfect timing, and spoke in a voice that carried just enough to be heard by those nearby. "Richard, thank you for the invitation." Her voice was smooth, cultured, warm, the voice of someone completely comfortable in spaces like this, someone who belonged here as much as anyone, someone who had every right to be exactly where she was. Richard's face drained of all color. His hand trembled as he automatically took hers, muscle memory from 1,000 business greetings taking over while his brain short-circuited. No words came out. His mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Olivia stood beside him, and her gasp was audible across the entrance hall. "Grace?" Her voice was a whisper of pure shock. The name rippled through the crowd like electricity. "Grace? The cleaning lady? That Grace?" The murmurs erupted, confused, shocked, fascinated. People pressed closer, trying to understand, trying to piece together how the woman scrubbing their floors had transformed into this vision of elegance and power. Derek Chen pushed through the crowd, his eyes wide. He stared at Grace, recognition slowly dawning, his expression shifting from confusion to absolute shock. This was not the entertainment Richard had promised. This was something else entirely. Grace released Richard's hand and turned to the crowd with a gracious smile, moving deeper into the party like she owned the place. And in that moment, watching her glide through the ballroom, it seemed like maybe she did. The social chess game had begun, and Grace was playing on a level none of them had anticipated. She moved through the party with the kind of ease that only comes from years of practice. She accepted champagne from a passing waiter, not nervously, not uncertainly, but with the casual grace of someone who'd attended 1,000 events exactly like this. She engaged in conversations, laughed at appropriate moments, offered insights that revealed depth and intelligence. Senator Patricia Aldridge was holding court near the terrace, discussing education reform with a circle of politicians and philanthropists. Grace drifted into the conversation naturally, and within moments, she was engaged in a substantive discussion about funding allocations and curriculum development. Patricia turned to Grace, clearly impressed by her knowledge. "You're quite well informed about education policy. What do you do?" Grace's smile was enigmatic, her answer perfectly crafted. "I specialize in restoration, making overlooked things beautiful again." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fascinating field. We need more people who see the value in restoration rather than just demolition and rebuilding." "Exactly," Grace agreed. "Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones people have stopped seeing. They just need someone to remind them of their worth." Richard watched from across the room, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be uncomfortable, out of place, embarrassed. Instead, she was thriving. She was shining. And everyone was drawn to her like moths to flame. Grace moved on and found herself near James Wu, the renowned architect who had designed some of the most celebrated buildings in the world. He was studying the estate's architecture, and Grace joined him, offering observations about the structural design, the flow of spaces, the integration of classical and modern elements. James turned to her with genuine interest. "You have an expert eye. Are you in the industry?" Grace's smile held secrets. "I've spent years studying the details of this house. Every corner, every angle, every deliberate choice in its design. You learn a lot when you pay attention to the details others overlook." "That's the mark of someone who truly understands architecture," James said, impressed. "Most people just see walls and windows. You see intention and artistry." Richard was watching, his discomfort growing into anger. He tried to intervene, to steer conversations away from Grace, to reclaim control of his own event. But Grace moved through the party like water, impossible to contain, impossible to control. Derek Chen, unable to contain his curiosity, finally approached Grace directly. He studied her face, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew, or thought he knew. "I don't believe we've met," Derek said, though uncertainty laced his voice. "You seem familiar, but I can't quite place you." Grace turned to him with a knowing smile. "Oh, we have met, Derek. Many times, actually." Derek's brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, I've served you coffee dozens of times. Usually you take it black with 2 sugars. Sometimes you switch to espresso in the afternoon." Derek's face went blank as understanding crashed over him like a wave. His eyes went wide. "Wait, you're not the cleaning lady?" Grace's smile never wavered. "Yes, that's exactly who I am." The words dropped into the conversation around them like a bomb. Heads turned. Whispers exploded. The revelations spread through the ballroom like wildfire, jumping from group to group, building in intensity with each retelling. The cleaning lady. The woman in the stunning gown, with the diamonds and the confidence and the intelligence. She was the cleaning lady. Across the room, Olivia grabbed Richard's arm with trembling hands, her voice panicked and sharp. "This is a disaster. Everyone's talking to her. Everyone's fascinated by her. This was supposed to humiliate her, Richard." Richard's face was red, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "She's humiliating us. This was supposed to humiliate her. How is she doing this? How is she?" "She's making you look cruel," Olivia hissed. "Can't you see? You invited the help as a joke, and she's shown up looking like royalty. Everyone's going to know what you did. Everyone's going to know this was meant to be cruel." Brandon, who had been watching the entire spectacle with a mixture of awe and guilt, approached Grace during a quiet moment. His young face was earnest, apologetic. "I'm sorry about my father," he said quietly. "What he did, inviting you like that, it wasn't right." Grace looked at the young man with genuine kindness. She saw the good in him, the potential for him to be better than his father. "You're not responsible for his choices, Brandon, only your own. Remember that." Brandon nodded, something shifting in his expression. Respect, maybe even admiration. "You're incredible. I hope you know that." Grace touched his shoulder gently. "Everyone is capable of being incredible when they remember their worth. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, including yourself." Then Celeste appeared, Richard's mother, the matriarch who had been watching everything unfold with sharp, knowing eyes. She approached Grace with the deliberate grace of old money, old wisdom, old understanding. "I've watched you for 6 years, Celeste said, her voice quiet but clear. "You clean with love, with attention, with care, like my mother did. She was in service too, before she married my father. She taught me that dignity isn't about what you do, it's about how you do it." Grace was surprised by the kindness, by the recognition in the older woman's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornwell. Call me Celeste." The older woman studied Grace's face, her gown, her bearing. "And that dress, you wear it like you were born to it." Grace's smile was soft, tinged with memory and loss and truth. "I was, once." Understanding passed between them. Two women who knew what it meant to move between worlds, to understand that status was performance and substance was something else entirely. Richard appeared suddenly, his face tight with anger and embarrassment. "Grandmother, please. Don't embarrass yourself by." Celeste turned to her son with a look that could cut glass. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp enough to silence the conversations around them. "The only embarrassment here is yours, Richard." The words hung in the air like a judgment, like a sentence, like the truth everyone was thinking, but only she dared to say. Richard's face went white, then red. His carefully constructed evening was crumbling around him. The joke had backfired. The entertainment had become his humiliation. The cleaning lady he'd meant to mock was now the most talked-about person at his own gala. And Grace Monroe stood at the center of it all, calm and poised and utterly in control, proving that you can take everything from a person except their dignity. And that dignity, once reclaimed, is the most powerful weapon of all. The turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Richard Thornwell stood at the edge of his own party, watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. The cleaning lady he'd invited as a punchline had become the star of his show. Every conversation seemed to orbit around Grace. Every glance seemed drawn to her. His guests, senators, CEOs, celebrities, were more interested in the woman who scrubbed floors than in him, the man who owned the floors. And Richard Thornwell couldn't tolerate not being the center of attention. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened with a fury that had been building all evening. This was supposed to be his moment, his event, his triumph, and this woman, this nobody, this employee, this cleaning lady, had stolen it from him. Enough. Richard grabbed a champagne glass and a knife from a nearby table. He tapped the glass sharply, the crystal ringing out across the ballroom like a bell, like a warning, like a declaration of war. The conversations died, the string quartet faded to silence. 300 faces turned toward him. Grace, standing near the terrace with a group of admirers, turned as well, her expression calm, almost expectant, like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Richard's voice carried across the ballroom with forced joviality, but there was an edge to it, something cruel lurking beneath the surface. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment, I have a confession to make. The crowd pressed closer, intrigued. Confessions at galas were rare, unexpected. This promised to be interesting. Our mystery guest this evening, Richard continued, gesturing toward Grace, the beautiful woman who has captivated so many of you. Well, she's actually my housekeeper. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through some parts of the crowd. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing something wrong in Richard's tone, in his smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's right, Richard pressed on, his voice growing louder, more aggressive. The woman you've all been so impressed with, the one you've been fawning over all evening. She cleans my toilets, she mops my floors, she's the help. The laughter died completely now. The discomfort was palpable, spreading through the ballroom like a chill. People exchanged glances, unsure where this was going, but certain it was nowhere good. Richard's mask slipped completely, revealing the cruelty underneath. I invited her as a social experiment, to show that anyone can play dress-up. Anyone can put on an expensive gown and diamonds and pretend to be someone they're not. It's all just performance, isn't it? The silence that followed was deafening, the cruelty of what Richard had done, the deliberate humiliation, the calculated setup, was now obvious to everyone. This wasn't a social experiment. This was sadism dressed up as entertainment. Grace stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged. That slight smile remained on her face, enigmatic, knowing. She didn't look humiliated. She didn't look hurt. She looked like someone watching a chess player make exactly the move she'd anticipated. Derek Chen stepped forward, his face twisted with disgust. Richard, what the hell are you doing? Richard turned on his friend, defensive now, angry. Oh, come on, Derek. You wanted entertainment. You said my parties were boring. Well, here it is. This is what you asked for. I didn't ask for this, Derek said quietly, his voice cold. This is cruel. This is beneath you, or at least, I thought it was. Richard's laugh was harsh, bitter. You're all such hypocrites. You treat the staff like furniture every day, and now you're going to pretend to be offended? Please. And then Grace stepped forward. She moved with deliberate grace, commanding the room without raising her voice, without making a scene. She simply stepped into the center of the ballroom, and 300 people fell silent, waiting, watching, knowing that something monumental was about to happen. Richard is right, Grace said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. This was an experiment, but not his. Richard's expression faltered. Confusion flickered across his face. Grace turned to address the crowd, and when she spoke, her voice held the weight of 6 years of silence, 6 years of watching, 6 years of being invisible while seeing everything. For 6 years, I've cleaned the floors of this estate. I've polished the silver you eat with. I've dusted the art you walk past without seeing. I've been invisible to most of you, moving through your world like a ghost, like furniture, like nothing. She paused, letting the words settle, letting the truth of them sink in. But while I've been invisible, I've also been watching. I've seen how you treat people you think are beneath you. I've heard the conversations you have when you think no one important is listening. I've witnessed who you really are when the cameras aren't rolling and the crowds aren't watching. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Grace's words were a mirror, and the reflection wasn't flattering. I chose this job, Grace continued, her voice stronger now. I chose humility over pride. I chose honest work over easy money. Because 6 years ago I made a decision. I left wealth behind to protect my children. I walked away from everything. The mansions, the money, the status. Because I learned something that some of you may never understand. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. I learned that character matters more than status. That who you are when no one's watching is who you really are. That dignity isn't about what you wear or where you work. It's about how you treat others. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some of the older guests were leaning forward, studying Grace's face with dawning recognition. My full name, Grace said clearly, is Grace Monroe St. Clair. The gasps turned into exclamations. The name meant something, especially to those who'd been in elite circles for decades. The Monroe family was old money, real legacy. The St. Clairs were East Coast aristocracy. Grace wasn't just pretending to belong in this world, she'd been born into it. Older guests began nodding, whispering to each other. Of course, I remember her now. She was married to Lawrence St. Clair. She disappeared years ago. I always wondered what happened to her. I walked away from everything, Grace said, her voice thick with the weight of that choice. Because I learned that all the wealth in the world means nothing if you have to compromise your soul to keep it. I chose my children's safety over social status. I chose freedom over fear. And I chose to rebuild my life on my own terms, with my own hands, doing honest work. She turned to face Richard directly, and the entire ballroom held its breath. You invited me here as a joke, Richard, to mock someone you thought was powerless, to humiliate someone you believed had no voice, no value, no worth beyond the work she did for you. Richard's face had gone pale, but Grace wasn't finished. But here's what you didn't know. Here's what you couldn't have anticipated because your arrogance blinded you to the possibility. Grace's voice was steady, controlled, devastating. While I cleaned your office, I read the documents you left out on your desk. While I emptied your trash, I saw what you threw away. While I was invisible to you, I was documenting everything. Richard's face went from pale to white. His eyes widened with something that looked like panic. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, Grace continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. The charity funds being diverted to your personal investments, the tax evasion schemes hidden in shell corporations, the employees being underpaid while you reported their salaries at market rate and pocketed the difference. Complete, absolute silence. Not a glass clinked. Not a person moved. The air itself seemed to have frozen. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands trembled. His face had gone from white to a sickly gray. Grace took a step closer to him, her voice softer now but no less powerful. I didn't come here for revenge, Richard. I came to give you a choice. The crowd pressed closer, desperate to hear what came next. You can make this right, Grace said clearly. You can donate the actual amounts to the charities you claim to support. You can pay what you owe, to the government, to your employees, to everyone you've cheated. You can treat the people who work for you with the dignity and respect they deserve. Richard's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. You're bluffing. You have no proof. Grace reached into the small clutch she carried, the one Lorraine had insisted she bring, and pulled out her phone. She held it up for Richard and the crowd to see. Kevin, your assistant, has been documenting everything for months. Every transaction, every falsified report, every instance of fraud. He came to me 6 weeks ago, exhausted by your corruption, desperate to do the right thing, but terrified of losing his job. From the crowd, Kevin stepped forward. The young man's face was pale, his hands shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. I couldn't watch it anymore, Mr. Thornwell. I'm sorry, but I couldn't be part of it anymore. Everything Grace said is true. I have copies of everything. Bank statements, emails, financial records, all of it. Derek stared at Richard with something like horror. Richard, if this is true, if even half of this is true. Senator Patricia Aldridge stepped forward, her face stern, her voice carrying the weight of political power. There will be investigations, federal investigations, the IRS, the SEC, the FBI. They'll all want to know about these allegations. Celeste, Richard's own mother, moved through the crowd to stand beside Grace. She looked at her son with profound disappointment, with the kind of heartbreak only a parent can feel when they realize their child has become someone they don't recognize. "Richard," Celeste said quietly, but her voice carried, "do the right thing. For once in your life, do the right thing." Richard stood there, surrounded by 300 witnesses, cornered by the truth, exposed by the woman he'd tried to humiliate. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed image, all of it crumbling in real time. His voice, when it came, was broken. I'll make it right. I'll make it all right." Grace nodded slowly. "Good, because dignity isn't about what you wear or where you work or how much money you have. It's about how you treat others. It's about the choices you make when you think no one's watching. And you, Richard, have been making the wrong choices for a very long time." She turned to address the crowd one final time. "All of you have a choice too. You can continue to judge people by their job titles, by their clothes, by their bank accounts. Or you can start seeing them as human beings worthy of respect, regardless of where they fall on your social ladder. The choice, like always, is yours." And then something miraculous happened. One person started clapping, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The applause started slowly, tentatively, but it built like a wave, like a crescendo, like thunder rolling across the ballroom. 300 of the city's most powerful people gave Grace Monroe a standing ovation. They applauded her courage, her dignity, her truth. They applauded the lesson she'd taught them, the mirror she'd held up to their own behavior, the reminder that character transcends class. Grace stood in the center of it all, calm and composed, nodding gracefully to acknowledge the applause, but not needing it, not requiring their approval to know her worth. Then she turned and began to walk toward the exit. The crowd parted before her, like the Red Sea, creating a clear path to the doors. As she moved through them, Jasmine appeared at the entrance, her daughter's face glowing with pride, with love, with absolute admiration for the woman who had raised her. Celeste stepped forward, gently touching Grace's arm, stopping her for just a moment. "Grace," the older woman said softly, "you'll always have a home here, as family, not as help, I mean that." Grace looked at Celeste with genuine warmth, touching the older woman's hand with gratitude. "Thank you, Celeste, that means more than you know, but I have my own home, and I'm proud of it." Celeste nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know you are, and you should be." Grace and Jasmine walked out of the Thornwell estate together, mother and daughter, arm in arm. The vintage Rolls-Royce waited for them, and as they climbed in, Grace took one last look at the mansion, where she'd spent 6 years cleaning, watching, and ultimately winning. Inside the Rolls-Royce, Jasmine turned to her mother, her eyes shining with tears of pride. "Mom, you were incredible. You were absolutely incredible." Grace smiled, relaxing into the leather seat, the weight of 6 years finally lifting from her shoulders. "I just reminded them that respect isn't given by status, it's earned by character. And character is what you carry with you long after the party ends, long after the gown comes off, long after everyone stops watching." The car pulled away from the estate, leaving behind the chaos, the revelation, the reckoning that Richard Thornwell would now have to face. Later that night, Grace stood in her modest apartment, carefully hanging up the midnight blue gown. It had served its purpose beautifully, but it wasn't who she was. It was just a tool, just a costume, just a reminder of what she'd once been and what she'd chosen to leave behind. Beside it, she hung her cleaning uniform, the simple navy dress she wore to work, the uniform that represented 6 years of honest labor, of dignity and humble work, of choosing integrity over image. She stood there for a moment, looking at both outfits hanging side by side, the gown and the uniform. Wealth and work, past and present, they were both part of her story, both pieces of who she was. Grace smiled, running her hand over both garments with equal respect, equal affection. Her voice, quiet in the empty apartment, carried the weight of truth, of hard-won wisdom, of absolute certainty. "They thought I was just the cleaning lady, but I was always so much more. And I didn't need their approval to know it. I didn't need their recognition to have worth. I didn't need their world to know my value." She turned off the light and looked out her window at the city beyond, a city full of people playing roles, wearing masks, pretending to be more than they were, or hiding who they really were. Character isn't what you wear. It's not where you work. It's not how much money you have, or what kind of car you drive, or which parties you attend. Character is who you are when the costume comes off. It's who you are when no one's watching. It's the choices you make when those choices cost you something. The screen faded to black, and then words appeared, white text on a black screen, a final message for everyone watching. Never let anyone make you feel invisible. Your worth is not defined by their limited vision. If this story moved you, if Grace's courage inspired you, if you believe that dignity and character matter more than status and wealth, then hit that subscribe button right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's ever been made to feel less than, someone who needs to remember their worth. And here's my question for you. What's the most important lesson you've learned from someone society told you to overlook? A janitor, a server, a clerk, someone whose job title didn't match their wisdom? Share your stories in the comments. Let's honor the people who taught us that character has nothing to do with career. Because Grace Monroe's story isn't just about one woman standing up to a billionaire. It's about all of us remembering that respect, dignity, and worth aren't things anyone can give us or take away. They're things we carry within ourselves, no matter what uniform we wear or what job we do. Never forget that. And never let anyone make you forget it.